Welcome to When Not Yet Becomes Right Now, the podcast where we dive deep into the moments of transformation, the times when not yet shifts into right now and everything changes. I'm your host, Jen Ginty, and this podcast is all about those pivotal moments in our life journeys. You know the ones when the hesitation fades, when we take that first step, even if it feels like a leap. It's in these moments that growth and healing begins. Each episode will explore stories of resilience, moments of clarity, and the sparks that ignite real change. From personal experiences to expert insights, we'll uncover how people navigate the complex journey we call life and come out stronger on the other side. Whether you're searching for that spark in your own life or just curious about how change unfolds for others, you're in the right place. We'll discuss the ups and downs, the breakthroughs and setbacks, and how to embrace the right now, even when it feels out of reach. Because sometimes the hardest part of the journey is realizing that the moment you've been waiting for has already arrived. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's get started. Hello, welcome to When Not Yet Becomes Right Now. I'm Jen, your host, and today we're speaking with Casey Kang Head. Casey is a 3-time cancer survivor and is a trauma-informed cancer coach. And I have to say, the trauma-informed part, I'm all about. She's highly trained to help those going through cancer, and I'm going to have her tell you more about that and also about her book. Hi, Casey.
Hi, thank you so much for allowing me to be here, Jennifer. I truly am grateful to be here with you today.
I'm so happy you're here.
That makes two of us. Figuratively and literally. So yeah, do you just want me to dive in?
Yeah, let's dive into it. Tell us about yourself. And I mean, you have gone through quite a cancer journey.
hmm
And, I'm really interested to learn all about what you've learned and how you're helping others.
Oh, absolutely. I've learned a lot, and it all started 10 years ago when I was 31 years old, and I thought I was going to go to an appointment during lunch and come back to work. And I literally got the news that I had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And yeah, so as you can imagine, your life completely changes instantaneously. And I was hospitalized immediately per the protocol. It's just really aggressive how they treat blood cancer. And so it's typically a children's cancer that I had, but I had the rare occasion of getting it at 31. And so I was hospitalized for like 28 days immediately. And I only got out because I lived so close to the hospital and promised to come back like 3 or 4 times a week. And um, 4 months into my treatment, I had a stroke from the chemotherapy that they were giving me. It not only was I supposed to still go through treatment because I wasn't in remission yet, but I also was now having to be faced with recovering from losing all um, efficacy over my left side. So I had to relearn how to walk, how to talk, how to use all of my left side things and brain. Um,
That's
so
that's so much to go through.
yeah, it was quite intense. Recovery was about 8, 9 weeks. Well, I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and then I did 8 weeks of outpatient therapy, 3 hours, 5 days a week, and it was grueling while still going through chemotherapy. Yeah, so my protocol for my treatment was 18 months long. So I finished my protocol, and then 7 weeks later, I relapsed, and
Wow.
they told me I was back. And it was not something that I had anticipated, considering when I started, they said this protocol you're on is a 97% cure rate. So now here I am back in the hospital because they said my cancer is back, and my oncologist is in the hospital room with me, which is super rare that your oncologist during the middle of the day, not on rounds, is in the hospital with you. Yeah. So she is explaining to me and my now ex-husband, your body is no longer responding to chemotherapy. we have two options. You can go on this immunotherapy or you can do this clinical trial. And after some much consideration and some talking back and forth with her, asking a lot of questions, we were like, we decided to do the, I say this is we because I thought of everyone that was there as a team member. Like my oncologists, they want to cure the cancer, they want to get rid of it. That's their job. So how can I participate and be the best, quote unquote team member of that, right? And so as a team, because I could do the immunotherapy and it wouldn't negate me from doing the clinical trial, and it was the least aggressive route at that moment. And these were the two options that I had. Well, I tried the immunotherapy, and basically my body was sent into a cytokine release storm, which is where your body starts to attack itself from the inside out and starts to kill it.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yeah. So I'm in the hospital, and now, for 3 days straight fighting 105-degree fever. And right before I was supposed to go to the ICU because the floor couldn't, quote unquote, didn't have the staff to tend to my needs, which rightfully so, it was intense. I somehow just promised, I begged the charge nurse to let me stay. I was going to be fine. I didn't really have any medical evidence of that, but I promised, I was like, it's going to be fine. I'm fine. And for whatever reason, they let me stay and I was fine. But now I'm in this precarious position of like, that didn't work. I'm going on a clinical trial. And there's a lot of testing to be on a clinical trial. I mean,
Imagine.
Yeah, everything and anything they are testing you for to get a baseline to understand where you're at with your body. And, it's intense. And so 1 week before I'm supposed to go on this clinical trial, it gets shut down.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Mm-mm. And I was devastated because I was like, well, this was what's next, right? Like, this is what I was supposed to be doing. And my team goes, there isn't anything. There's like, they did say, they were like, there is one other clinical trial going on. It's at a different hospital, but it's full. And with clinical trials, there's no line skipping. And they said, even if we put you on the list, which we're going to do, it doesn't mean you're going to qualify because they have different standards and protocols for that clinical trial versus the one that I was supposed to go on. And so I was like, great. It doesn't sound like that's really a viable option from how they prefaced it and the language that they used. So I said, that's pretty much out because it sounded like there were a lot of people on this list. And so we said, what's next? And they were like, we don't have anything. And I was like, what do you mean you don't have anything? Like, there's no other hospital, there's nobody doing anything. They're like, no. They're like, we're going to give you more chemotherapy to keep the cancer at bay, give you blood and platelets to keep you alive. They're like, but we're waiting right now. So I'm in the hospital this entire time. And somewhere around day 50, the rounding doctor comes to us and says, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society just ended their annual doctors conference. Your oncologist, because the goal was to get into remission to get a stem cell transplant. So I had a stem cell hematologist oncologist. And she goes, she wants you to try this. And it was 2 pages of research. It was a different immunotherapy for cancer that wasn't even mine. She goes, she wants you to try this. Do you want to? And I'm sitting there looking at the doctor, and I'm looking at my ex-husband going, like, you're asking us? Like, I don't feel like there's a lot of options. And so my husband goes, can we think about it? Do we have time? And he goes, yes, you do. So after some debate and reading the paper, that the outcomes were not great. There was 114 participants, 11 of them had what I had, and the outcomes were not good. I just remember going, this does not read well. And so I debated back and forth with my husband, and I said, the reality is, like, I'm gonna die. And at least if I do, it's not going to be for nothing. And so,
That just must have been so debilitating to hear.
yeah, it was, you know, I never lost hope that there would be something. But in those moments when reality hits, you're just like, I either can fight this every step of the way or I can accept it and die. And I said, that's so selfish to just accept it and die. I said, at least I don't die for nothing.
You're such a strong woman that you made that decision.
Yeah,
That you're like, this isn't just for me. This is for others who may need this.
right. Like I go, at least it goes like I'm giving back to someone, you know? Like it just at those moments you're just like, what does this all mean? Well, maybe this is my purpose to help someone else live, right? That's what you think about. And you know, the doctors came around the next day. We told them we had made our decision that we were going to try it. And I was, after the first failed immunotherapy, I wasn't really so gung ho about it. So I was really hesitant about like, this could literally kill me again. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. Um, and just really how scary that was and how just like, no, there's not a lot of people that can understand or even help you through those decisions of like, how do I navigate this? So I trusted my gut a lot in those moments. And so they said, okay, we will start the process, which was basically like, they're like, we're going to have to write a letter of compassion for compassionate care to the FDA and the drug manufacturer because this is either going to kill you or let you live. And it's not in a phase trial, so there really wasn't like anything to go on. It was like my Hail Mary or my I always call it was my moonshot, right? Like it was my one opportunity to figure out what if I was going to live. So I'm on day like 60 something now at the hospital and I'm like, can I please go home? Like I promise I'll come back every day if I need to, but I need sleep and like I'm in this box and I'm going bananas, right? Like I'm going stir crazy.
Oh, I can absolutely imagine that.
Right? Like my ex-husband at the time, he could leave, like everyone could leave, and I was like, I can't even leave. Like I haven't 60 something days in, I'm like, I haven't even breathed fresh air. Like I'm I need to get out of here. And so I basically like begged them and pleaded with them, and I said, I will come back every day if you need me to. I will be here first thing in the morning, last thing in the night, like, but I just can't sleep here anymore. And so 68 days total, and they let me go home. And they said, as I left, they were like, you should really settle your affairs. And that
Not
was
what
like,
you want to hear, right?
no, not when you have like some glimmer of hope, right? Like, okay, if we write this letter, granted, we didn't know if it was going to get approved or not. Like, but okay, but you're telling me there's this thing, but you still want me to like plan that that's not happening.
Just,
And so,
just this mismatch of information that's so confusing, and
right.
especially in the state of mind that you're
Mm-hmm. Right. When you're like literally living moment to moment and day to day of like, I'm just trying not to throw up on myself today. Those like little things of like, I'm just showering, I'm just walking, I'm doing the things that hopefully put my body in a position to handle whatever this immunotherapy is going to do to me because I don't know, even if I get it, and I don't know when I'm going to get it. So I have to like take care of this body to like make sure it can survive until it gets it. If it does, like all these things are going through your head. And, you know, I really didn't want to settle my affairs, but I did. Like I planned a funeral with my now ex-husband, and I had hard conversations with friends and family, which I never expected to have. And some of them, it still makes me really emotional because they were some of the hardest conversations, but I'm so grateful that I got to have them because it gave me time to acknowledge Like, I might not be here.
Casey, I am so sorry that you went through this awful, awful process.
Yeah, it was brutal. And I remember like the conversation with my dad will never ever leave my being because it was the hardest one to have. And he came over every day during my journey, even if it was like for 5 minutes. And we're going on like year two at this point. And we're sitting there and I remember staring at the TV and I'm holding back tears as much as I can. And I just go, without looking over at him, I said, Dad, I might not make it. And he, without skipping a beat, without looking over, goes, yes, sometimes we don't make it to the end. And it was, you know, in hindsight, I'm so glad that's what he said. But in the moment, I just really wanted him to give me a hug and tell me everything's gonna be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You wanted him to be your dad.
Yeah.
Right? Like you felt it in your core. Right?
Yeah.
This is my dad, and I need him to give me the comfort that he would give his little Casey,
Yeah.
right?
Right? Like, I want you to fix it like dads fix things, right? Like,
Right.
make it better. And, I actually, Jennifer, to sidetrack for a second, I had the opportunity now 4 years ago to circle back to that conversation and ask him why he said that. And I said, well, why did you say that? All I wanted to hear was like, everything's gonna be okay. He goes, there's no books on how to talk to your dying daughter.
Yeah. It's that idea that, they have to go into like some sort of like doctor mode or something, right? Where they're going to be like, yep, these are the facts. This is what we're working with. When
Yeah.
really you need, your daughter needs a hug.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And also in that conversation, like I realized like he was dealing with and grappling with the same thing that I was. Right? Like we were in the same spot of like this realization of like, we may never have this again. And how hard that must have been for him. And like, now I'm grateful because like, what is the end for anyone? You
that's a
know?
great question. You
Right?
just, right. We
It,
don't know.
we don't know. But the end is the end whenever the end is. And so I'm grateful that he said genuinely what he was feeling. But in that moment, I was so angry with him. I'm not gonna lie.
No, it makes sense for where you were at, but
Yeah.
he was also at his place in his journey of it too. And it's
Hmm.
so hard to take yourself out of that and put yourself in another person's shoes when it
Yeah.
hurts so much.
Yeah. I agree. And so, spoiler alert, I was approved for this drug. um,
Wonderful.
and thankfully they gifted it to me as part of like research back to them. Like basically like I signed away like all my medical records and stuff to them for this drug, which, I looked at the bill and it was $250,000 a dose.
Woo!
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's the state of our medical system,
Right?
right?
Yeah, I was like, woof, okay, thank you. And so I did 4 rounds of that. I got into remission, thankfully, which they weren't really anticipating. They thought was going to be a lot more challenging. So immediately, they planned to do a stem cell transplant, and so I went right back into the hospital. um, for another 30 days or 32 days. My brother is my donor. He's 100% match. I had my stem cell transplant and I get out of the hospital 6 months later as I'm just, like physically recovering and I'm still, a mess basically from all the GVHD and the graft versus host that's happening inside of my body. And I relapsed again and I was not ready. I was not prepared. They caught it so early through some blood work that I wasn't feeling any different yet. And I say yet because my body was a mess. And so it was really hard to differentiate what was happening. And when they told me, it broke me. It's just like, I started crying and I said, I can't do this anymore. I literally was like, I'm done. I tapped out, finished. Like, I can't keep doing this, right? And my husband would just put his hand on my shoulder and he goes, whatever you decide to do is what we're going to do. And I'm grateful that he said that because it gave me permission to like feel like it was okay to say enough is enough. And so I was crying and I don't even know for how long. And all of a sudden this voice popped into my head and it said, your dad would be so disappointed if you just gave up. And I was like, that freaking guy. And I was like, so kind of mad that's what came, to my head. And I was just like, begrudgingly, I said, fine. And I'm having this internal conversation. I didn't say any of this out loud. I said, fine, but that's it. We're done. Like, I'm not doing this for me. I don't care if I live or die. I go, but I'm doing this for him. I'm doing this for my husband. I'm doing this for everyone that helped me get to this point. I go, because I don't care if I live or die. I go, but they sure as hell do. But this is it. Like, we're done. I go, so you're either going to let me live or you're going to kill me. I'm not doing this for the rest of my life. Like, it was just like a deal I had to make. And so the goal after that was remission again, stem cell transplant again, and hopefully, see how, if that works. And so we did 4 more rounds of that immunotherapy and I got into remission again. And we were like, okay, are we going back into the hospital again? And they said, no, we're just going to wait. And I said, what do you mean? Right? Like, that's kind of like the worst thing you could tell a cancer survivor. Like, I'll wait. They're like, yeah, we just want to wait and see what happens. And I said, how long are we going to wait? Or they're like, we don't know yet. Just like, we're not going to rush it yet. We're just going to wait some time, give it some time. And I said, I don't like this plan, right? Like, it just like, you're changing it, number one. And number two, like, you keep telling me my cancer is so aggressive, but like, you're okay with just waiting till it comes back? Like, it just like all the messages were so confusing.
Yeah, I
And
mean, it's like switching up everything in the end, right? Like you've been so on me for this treatment and going through this and you know, I don't know if it was daily, but I can imagine. And suddenly it's like, well, we'll see what happens now.
right, right. And so I was just like, okay. So I was still at this point going back to the hospital once a week for blood work, for appointments. Like, that didn't go away for a long time. And so every week I'd go. My oncologist, she's amazing. She's retired now, unfortunately. I wish she was still practicing medicine, but she retired. And she, in her thick Russian accent, would always, as she left the room, put her hand on my shoulder and goes, baby girl, we're just lucky you're alive. I'm just like, that is not, like, I love you and I'm glad you're saving my life, but like, don't say that to me.
Yeah, what is all of this language of you're here. We're happy you're here today.
Right? Right? Like, and so I lived like that for like 6 months. And finally, I worked up the courage because I was like, is it okay if I go live life? Like, I don't know what we're doing here, right? like it was very confusing. I mean, I was still getting blood and platelets, but like, what are we actually doing? Like, what's the plan? And she said, she goes, yeah, we think so. We think you're okay to live life. And I was like, okay, well, how do I go do that, right?
You haven't been doing that for how,
No.
like 2 years?
At that point, we're in year 3.5, 4.
Wow.
Yeah.
So for the past 4 years, you've been going through this and wondering what the next step is. And then they're like, go on, live
Yeah.
life, even though 4 years ago we stopped you from living life.
Right. Like, I only knew myself as a cancer patient at this point. Like, I didn't know life outside of that. Every day was waking up thinking, like, how do I not die today?
Yeah, I mean, it becomes an identity.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, what do I need to be doing? They're like, eat right and exercise. And I'm like, that's not helpful.
Right?
Yeah. And
Don't
so
you tell everybody that? Don't you tell the like 70-year-old man the same thing?
right, that 70-year-old man lived his life. Like I'm in the middle of my life. And, and so in that moment, I realized I'm like, oh, they don't know life after cancer because all they're doing is trying to kill cancer. And I said, okay, well, who's going to help me? And there wasn't a lot of services out there. And everything that I had gone to for surviving were clinicians who I appreciate very much, who meant well, but didn't actually have experience going through it. And so their point of view just missed the mark every time.
It's so clinical. They
Yeah.
don't have the other side of it where they're helping you, holding your hand through living again.
Right? Like, uh, uh, do I go back to work? Like, what all these questions like of like what am I supposed to do now? Like my life is completely different. And I'm still dealing with like a lot of side effects, but also how do I get back to living? Like, because I just feel like I'm still surviving every day, thinking it's gonna come back because it was so aggressive. I was just like, I don't I don't feel comfortable going out there and having it ripped away again. I couldn't withstand that. And I got angry. I was really angry. I ended up having like a nervous breakdown basically.
Well, I can only imagine that would happen under all of these circumstances.
Yeah, I fell to the floor on my kitchen and I just broke down and it was the first time that I admitted that I was not okay. Because, as a cancer survivor, you're like, "Oh, you're alive. You should be feeling great." And you're like, "Yeah, I'm okay." But really like the internal conversation was like, "You are not okay. Nothing's okay. Everything's not okay." And
They didn't say, give you some sort of psychological counseling for this.
mm-mm.
They just like, go ahead and survive now.
Yeah, basically, I was already in therapy, like about I would say 10-ish months into my original treatment plan, I sought out a therapist that dealt with cancer specifically, because I just knew I needed help. Like I didn't know what I was doing. No one around me knew, and so there was no one I could even ask. And it took me a long time to find her, and I remember there were points of contention even with her where I walked out. I walked out of an appointment and I go, "You don't understand." And we literally had a verbal argument about it. And I left that appointment. I wrote her a scathing email about how she didn't understand. And I showed up the next week and she goes, "I didn't think you were going to come back." And I said,
I'm
"Look,
surprised too.
honestly, Jennifer, I'm really surprised that I came back." And I looked at her and I go, "I don't know where else to go and I need help." I knew my limitations and what I was feeling and I was like, But can we disagree? Can we agree to disagree that you don't understand?"
It's
And
it's if you haven't lived through it,
mhm.
how can you possibly understand the physical feeling of it, the emotional feeling of it, the mental side of things? Like, I don't know, did you have a lot of like brain fog, that kind of thing that was inhibiting you
Oh
from
yeah,
being?
all of it. Like you're just a hot mess. You can't think clearly. Your emotions are all over the place. You know, that's why I became trauma informed because I wanted to understand why that happens. And yes, some of it to some degree is the chemotherapy, but a lot of it's just being in trauma for so long. Your brain adapts to that and changes. Like, so I needed to understand why that happened and how to like help serve myself and my clients to get out of it. If you look at chemo brain or which is brain fog and trauma brain, they're the side effects, the symptoms are extremely similar, if not the same. And so I needed to better understand myself as well. And the funny thing is, like, as we were wrapping up our treatment together, the therapist that I had, because I knew at some point our journey was going to end, I asked her, I go, so I know that you haven't personally gone through cancer. Have you? And like, because maybe I was wrong. And she goes, no, I haven't. I go, so what's your experience? And she goes, well, my brother had it. And I go, oh, so you don't understand. And I just like, I gave her that compassion because I was like, you think you understand, but you don't.
Right. She was living adjacent to
Hmm.
the cancer. Right.
Right.
She was watching someone she loved going through it, but she was adjacent.
Hmm.
She was just next to the cancer.
Which is a totally different experience. Like, I don't know what my ex-husband experienced. Like, I can't even begin to fathom what he experienced, or my dad, or anyone that watched me through it. I can't because I went through it. I don't, and I would never pretend to understand. And, I know they are, they are still, a lot of them are affected by it. Like, I go to doctor's appointment, my dad's like, are you okay? Everything okay? I'm like, yes, Dad, I'm fine. But I know it's like right below the surface. And how could it not be, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Your loved ones are watching you go through this and living their own fears and worries for you. And I can absolutely understand them constantly being like, "You went to the doctor. What happened? What did they say?" Because they're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, especially for what you went through, the 4
Mhm.
years of it.
Yeah. Yeah, of just like trying not, like I always say, I just tried not to die. Like, you know, it's just that's the whole goal, is just don't die. Like, it sounds so crazy to say out loud, but it's the truth.
So, how did you decide that you wanted to get into helping others going through cancer?
So it honestly, it wasn't what I originally planned. Through my own struggles of trying to figure it out, like I knew, number one, I had to get rid of the fear, right? Like, I was paralyzed by it. I was doing some really obscene things that in hindsight, you're like, that sounds like you just lost your marbles a little bit. Like, you should be committed, like wearing the same clothing, eating the same thing, because I didn't want to jinx it to come back. All these things that in the moment you're like, totally makes sense, right?
Yeah, well, that's the fear creeping in, saying, okay, this worked today. So I'm
Yeah.
going to have to do it tomorrow to make sure it works tomorrow, too. Ah,
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like you're living in your own prison. And so I was like, okay, if I even want to step foot forward, I'm like, I need to stop living this. And so I was like, well, how do I do that? Right? Like, how do I just, it's not like a light switch you can turn off. So I was like, how do I really get out of survival and stop doing this? So I dove deep. I researched, I talked to experts. I again was still in therapy. And it still wasn't enough, right? I went on a healing retreat that I couldn't afford at the time because I needed something, but I didn't know what I needed. And I just kept trying things that were being guided by my intuition. And a lot of it, trust me, I wasted a lot of time on stuff that didn't work. But what I
but you have to
found,
try, right? You have to
right?
try.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I'm glad I did try those things, because now I just was like, okay, that's totally not it. But what I really started doing was researching, okay, well, if we're at war with ourselves, like, what are veterans doing to get out of their PTSD and their trauma, right? So I was kind of taking things that I was reading about what they were doing, and some of the things that they were being taught, and applying it to myself, because I'm like, same but different, the difference is, a big difference is, like, when they're taken out of the war zone, quote unquote, they don't have to go back necessarily, but we do. We have to go back to a doctor's appointment. We have to go back to the hospital. We have to, right? These aren't, I mean, everything's a choice, but like, the ramifications of that are real.
That's what complex PTSD is. And I think that's something we really need to give the listeners more of an understanding of, because complex PTSD is you're steeped
Yes.
in trauma. Like
Hmm.
it's cancer treatments, it's going through that, it's going through childhood abuse,
Mhm.
homelessness, domestic violence. Those things you're living in
Right.
that trauma, and it changes your body chemistry, it changes your neurons, and you
Mhm.
become hyper, hyper vigilant, hyper focused. And it's
Mhm.
at a much higher level than people really understand.
Right? And it's so much more complex because it's you're immersed in it, like you said. Like you're not like it's not like a one-time event where it happened and then you're done with it forever. Like it happens for most over the course of years, right? Like childhood trauma, it's not like a one-time thing and then it's gone. Like it's usually years of something happening or a long stretch of time, and that's really the complexities of it. It's like you don't have a break from it.
Yeah, I mean, I lived 14 years with my abuser, and when he was taken out of our family, the trauma doesn't end. It's just a different trauma that happens. For me, it was the court system trying to
Mm,
put him in prison. And for others, it's other things like some kids have to go into foster care after abuse. So the trauma doesn't stop right there when the abuser is gone. We
yeah,
have other traumas that happen afterwards.
right? It's the same thing as like our follow-up medical appointments. It's not the same, but it is the same in the sense of like we're not done. And this is like something that I think people who watch us go through really need to understand is like we're not done when our last chemo or radiation or surgery happens. Like we are still in it for a very long time. And it's hard for people to grasp that because they're like, but you're done. Aren't you good?
Right.
I was not good.
No, no, and when we keep pushing ourselves to try to get through it, we disconnect,
Mm-hmm.
right? We dissociate.
100%.
And right, so that was the whole thing with my court case with my abuser going to jail. That's when I said not yet. That's when my not yet started. I was
Right?
like, not yet. I'm not dealing with this trauma. I'm going to college. I'm going to have a career. I'm going to be a mother. And that was what was pushing, I kept pushing off because of fear mostly. And I wasn't going to be able to function for people and be there for people.
Like if I unpack this backpack, what's going to happen? Right? Like, so a little bit background about me is like I went through a lot of childhood trauma, 10 years of it basically straight. And I just did the same thing as you. It was like work, checking boxes of life, like, because I don't know what else to do. And this is what been programmed to achieve and strive for. And then I got cancer and it was like, oh, so, the trauma for me just continued.
Yeah.
And I think it all adds up to like I wasn't coping well in the end, which was the catalyst for me to figure it out because I was struggling and every during my journey, I met a lot of survivors and they were like, just wait till you're done, you're gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be good again, you're okay, blah blah, just get through it, right? So I'm like thinking that same thing, like, oh, I'm gonna be done. So I like basically gaslit myself and took on a lot of shame and blame and was like, what's wrong with you? You can't figure it out.
Yeah.
Everyone else is fine and what's wrong with you, right? To myself.
Oh, we put that on ourselves. That is the shame, right?
Yeah,
It's that feeling that, oh, I'm not doing what people say I should be doing.
right,
I'm not at that point, and everybody thinks I should be.
right. Like, why can't you just be happy you're alive, right? Like, I was saying
Uh,
that to myself. Like,
uh,
it's
yeah.
insane, But so the reason why I share that is because the more I started to actually share about those feelings on social media, the more women were reaching out and was like, wait a minute, what did you do to stop feeling that way? And I was like, well, I did I'm like, it's not one thing, it's all these things and blah. And I started to realize, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not alone. And is this why I lived? So I can help others? Like, there are two just very poignant moments that were happening at the same time. And I was like, I'm not alone. Oh my God. Thank God. I'm like, not that I want anyone to feel that way, but it just,
Right.
you never do.
Well, I mean, we all need to feel as though we have a community in some way, right?
Right. Right. Because I didn't feel like I had a community because of my age throughout my journey. Like, I didn't fit in with the old people who were all in the waiting room. And I mean old, like 65 plus crowd, and at 31, that's old to me. Now it's like, oh, that's really actually not that far away. um, and I didn't fit in with the people who had traditionally been diagnosed with this, which are 3 to 5 year olds. So I'm like sitting there going like, I don't really have anyone to talk to about this. Not that I couldn't have walked up to any of the elderly people that were in the waiting room, but it just didn't. They all thought that I was like there with somebody else. I wasn't the someone. And as soon as my name was called and I got up, you could see the name, like their faces completely changed. And it's like, I know you're not saying things, but you're saying everything. And
It's
it's like,
shocking.
yeah, yeah,
Shocking. Your age is shocking. You're so young. And
mhm,
I'm sure they saw that and they were like,
yeah. Because
yes.
it is young. It is very young to be diagnosed with a cancer, and to be in a waiting room full of people that are, could be your parent. It's really jarring. So even me being there was jarring for me. Like I'm like, I don't belong here. Like it's like that disconnect. So I started to share more and more organically. I just was like, if I'm gonna say what I need to say, and I'm gonna say it in my voice and as real as it can be. And I go, because it's not for me anymore. It's for that one person who was me, who needs to feel like they're not alone. And that was the whole idea of sharing to begin with. It was never to do anything like coaching. It was just to ensure that that one person didn't feel what I felt, which was, to be quite honest, like I wanted to die after fighting so hard to live. And as a result of that, though, I was just like, oh, wait, people really need help. So, like, all the things that I was selfishly doing to help myself, like now I was just applying it to them, and it was like working. And I was like, there's something bigger here. And so I put together like this very informal, like in the very beginning, like years ago, manually sending out like writing prompts and emails and like with things to do. And I kept, like, these women were like, oh my God, this is like, I would have never thought to ask myself these questions. And I go, this isn't anything crazy. This is what I asked myself. This is what I read in one book. I got this one sentence in this one book, and this is what I pulled out from it. But it got me this answer, and eventually actually put it all into a book. Not all of it, the majority of it, into a book, because I just was like, somebody's going to need this. They're going to need actual things that they can like answer and actually understand what they're feeling is they're not alone. And so the book, quite frankly, poured out of me. I couldn't type fast enough at times.
That's great.
And yeah, it was very out of body. It felt, it didn't feel hard. Everyone's like, writing a book's hard. I'm like, oh,
Well, this was
it's
just like was this like a love language to your healing, right? That book.
yeah, because it was just like, what are the questions that really made a difference for me? And I put them in there, shared a little bit about my story to understand why I'm asking the question, and then left it up to the reader to answer it. And to me, that was like, that's what I would have wanted. So I just started creating all these things that what would I have wanted to help me succinctly instead of searching endless hours to find them. I wrote the book and then I created the course from the book a little bit, and like all of the other things that I was doing. And I was like, okay, that's it. I'm like, that's the core of what I did to get myself to a better place. And I mean, I haven't stopped learning since then, but it was everything that I did to help myself.
And now you're giving that to others who need it so desperately.
Mhm.
And it's so important because you who went through it.
Mm.
And so you understand them. Just like you had said, your therapist, she didn't go through it. She doesn't understand. Family doesn't understand. It's you.
Yeah.
And that book is you.
Right?
It's like an extension of you.
Right? It's the same thing as when you were like, I went through all these things, like no one can, I can't relate to it. But if I knew somebody that was going through it, I'd be like, here, you need to talk to Jennifer all day long because she went through it. She knows exactly what you're talking about. She can relate to it better than I can.
Yeah,
She could probably
exactly.
give you more helpful advice than I ever could.
Right. It's all centered on our experiences and what we need, and understanding that maybe that also is what others need. And that's why I created my monster doll that I use for kids, because he's named My Moody Monster. And it's because I needed a monster to rip apart and throw across the room and bang against the wall when I was going through my symptoms,
Right?
And then I created this doll and was like, this doll could really help others. And that's what you're doing. And with your course. So where can we find the course in the book?
The book is on Amazon. It's called Finding Your Way Back to Heart Center Cancer Treatment Ended Now What? And the course is like you reach out to me and I'll happily give you details. There are details on my website at www.thehappierhustle.com. It is something that there's options. So if you wanted to do it on your own, you could, or if you wanted more additional help and coaching, that's an option. So there's different ways in which you do. Like, I'm a self-starter, so I don't necessarily need all the coaching, although the coaching is amazing, but like some people just are that way, and that's totally fine. And some people want community and want it. I love community. I think without it, we are nothing, right? Like without
Right.
people, nothing. Um, and I think there's so much value you don't realize you're gonna get as well.
Yeah. I feel like the coaching is that connection, right? And yeah, I'm not necessarily a connection type person when it comes to that, but I can see it being so positive when someone's going through cancer and having someone who has gone through it coach them through this.
Right? Like, do you even know what questions you're supposed to ask in a follow-up appointment when you're done? Like, all these questions that, like, I literally trial and error, like, I can save you time, money, energy just by being able to guide you in a better way. Like, did you think to ask for this? Like, do you know that all these tests are moved up because now you've gone through this? Like, these little nuances that, like, they don't tell you. And that unless you ask the question, oftentimes aren't shared.
I can see that happening. Wow. Casey, you are a force to be reckoned with. My word, this is such an amazing story of challenges that you've overcome and taking that challenge and the things you've overcome and creating something beautiful for others.
Yeah.
I want
I
to
mean,
thank you for that.
oh, thank you, Jennifer. I mean, isn't that how we learned over millennia, though? It's through sharing stories and and that's like the ultimate way we learn in life.
Right, right. So give us where we can reach you.
You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at The Happier Hustle. And I would love it if you said hi, reach out. I'd love to say hi back and say thank you. Thank you for listening.
And that will all be in our notes so that you can get in touch with Casey. Thank you again. This was such a beautiful conversation. And I feel so lucky and blessed that you wanted to share that story with me.
Well, thank you for allowing me to do so. I genuinely appreciate it from the bottom of my heart.
Wow, what a story that Casey has given us today. She's such a strong individual who went through a cancer journey that almost killed her, but she kept going, not just for herself, but for others, for her family, and for others who are also going through cancer. She's available now to help others go through their journey because she herself went through it and knows what it's like to go through it and get onto the other side of it. Check the show notes and say hello to Casey. And if you do need her help, I strongly recommend reaching out to her because she's such a kind soul and ready to help others.